you'd be surprised how many times these people come out of left field with all kinds of resolutions that would greatly diminish the responsibility and the autonomy of the women's division.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You read the long version. Kind of hungry now. So, but yes, to let you know, it said forthcoming at the time that I had sent her that little blurb, but it is actually out now. This collection is called Activism in the Name of God, Religion and Black Feminist Public Intellectuals from the 19th Century to the Present. And my chapter on Hoover is in that collection. So if anyone's interested, I do have some flyers here you could pick up and take with you with ordering information, or just if you want to take a picture of it so you can order it, obviously, almost anywhere books are sold these days. And up front, let me just say that I had not ever met anyone who knew her. For the first few years that I was doing this research, which I've been doing it at least 8 years now, not just on her, but over Methodist women. And I said it the way we say Theressa in South Louisiana, Theressa with a hard T. But come to find out, when I got up here, the family says Theressa. So I still have trouble saying it that way, just because I'm so used to sliding into the tradition of TH being a T in French in South Louisiana. So I say Theressa. And actually, I went to the main repository for the Methodist Church. Their National Archives is at Drew University in Madison, New Jersey, General Conference on Archives and History, GCAH. And I read and listened to everything they had there by or about or generated by Theressa, including some videotaped interviews. And the people who were talking about her said Theressa. So I think she kind of just was easy about it and didn't necessarily correct people if they didn't say Theressa, which is the way that her family pronounced it. But just wanted to make that clear, that I'm aware that I'm probably mispronouncing it. This is a work in progress. I do have this one chapter out, but I'm working on again, a much larger project. Plus I have another one in the pipeline that is currently out for peer review. And so there's plenty of time for revisions, and I welcome any kind of feedback that the audience may give me. I'm really pleased to give this talk here because I'm hoping that I may have be able to get some leads on maybe people that knew her family, if not people in the audience, perhaps people on Zoom. And I'm easy. My information, professional information, is found easily on the web. If anybody wants to contact me, you can find that through University of Arkansas. And I would welcome that. I welcome any leads or feedback that you can give me, because I was disappointed. I have been disappointed to find that I've not been able to locate any personal papers of hers. I have all of her public stuff, everything she published. I've got all that. But I don't have anything from her family, no personal papers whatsoever. And there's an issue there with African Americans that's always much more problematic. But if anyone knows of any stash that I am unaware of, I would just absolutely love to read those, to have access to those. If I had those, I could probably do a full-length biography. She's that important, and I feel like she needs a full-length biography. But it's really hard to do that without those personal papers from her. She never married, and so she didn't have direct heirs, and that also makes it more problematic to locate personal papers. I can talk more about that later if you want to. So I'll just go ahead and I'm going to launch into sort of an introductory part of the talk first, and then I'll go through in more detail after I finish that. For Theressa Hoover, the Women's Division of the Board of Global Ministries of the United Methodist Church and feminist theology were profoundly freeing. The Methodist Church's doctrines, creeds, practices, and policies provided opportunities for Hoover to become a nationally significant African-American feminist trailblazer, public intellectual, lay theologian, and progressive changemaker. And part of the process of what I'm doing here, I'm not going to go through all the historiography here, but I also love to use this example of Southern religion as a progressive force, which is contrary to what most of the historiography is. Mostly we hear about Southern religion as a conservative force. There's a lot of that, but that erases or whitewashes those aspects of Southern religion, which were also a progressive force. And especially the women's division of the Methodist Church was very much that. Not uniformly, because that's always true, but it is there. That element is there. So that's kind of the focus of what I'm talking about here. Don't worry, I won't quiz you on all of this. I put this up here because it took me, I think, 2 years to figure this out right here. The church goes through various mergers and name changes, and all of the divisions go through name changes, and it gets very difficult to learn all of that. I don't expect you to, but these are her official titles. Again, I'm going to go back and talk more about these in just a minute. The most important one for a national audience is the position that she took in 1968 when she became Deputy General Secretary of the Women's Division of the Board of Global Missions, which is now Ministries of the United Methodist Church. And in 1973, she became the CEO of United Methodist Women, which is now United Women in Faith. So again, the names change a lot. So basically what I look at in my research is the UMC and its predecessors. I don't look at any of the other Methodist denominations, of which there are many. And I also look at UMW, now United Women in Faith, and its predecessors. I don't look at any of the others. That's enough, let me tell you. There's a lot of documents. Just to try to bite that off is enough for me to chew. And it's the largest denomination, and it's the most significant denomination. So when she became CEO, basically, of the United Methodist Women, I'm using a little bit of shorthand here, so please forgive me. That gave her the distinction of attaining the highest executive position ever held by an African-American female in any mainline denomination in the country. In 1971, Ladies' Home Journal named her one of America's most important top 75 most important women in the country. Universally well-liked by those who worked with her. Her co-workers described her as whip-smart, tough but fair, someone who promoted racial justice fiercely and advocated justice fiercely for women and children nationally and internationally. She was unafraid to speak truth to power, but she did so with grace, compassion, and respect. The Women's Division, just to let you know, was the policymaking body for the missionary organizations, the lay women's missionary organizations. Well, let me go back to that so you can keep your eyes on that for a second, which is what she headed. And in 1968, that organization, which is transforming into UMW, had about between 1.5 and 1.75 million members internationally. It is an international organization, making it the oldest continuously existing single-sex women's organization in the world. It was also the most, sorry, I forgot to turn my timer on, so wave at me if I'm running over. It was also the most autonomous among Christian denominations, women's organizations, controlling its own money and electing its own leadership. As CEO of this enormous corporation, that's effectively what it was, Hoover worked to overturn racial and gender discrimination in both church and society. Under her guidance, members of UMW across the nation supported the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, and was one of the first religious groups to do that, to go on record in support. That is her doing, her and some of the people who are on Zoom today, some of my sources are on Zoom today, who were also instrumental in this. So support of ERA, support of reproductive rights, and other goals of second wave of feminism. She racked up quite a number of honors, one of those being that she is the only woman for whom a Methodist church has been named, Theressa Hoover, now Memorial United Methodist Church in Little Rock, which was chartered in 1980. If I have time, I'll talk a little bit about that too. She was a political progressive and an activist Christian, a firebrand, a principled leader with, to quote her, a healthy ego, as she said, for which I make no apologies. I admire that. She retired in 1990 and stayed in New York for about another decade. In the early 2000s, she moved to Fayetteville. The church's headquarters were in New York. She moved back to Fayetteville to be with family. She attended Mount Sequoyah United Methodist Church on Old Wire Road instead of her home church of St. James, which I'm going to talk about in a second too, because St. James had always been small and didn't have an active UMW. And since she had been head of UMW, she wanted to continue to work there. She was inducted into the Arkansas Black Hall of Fame. And in 2008, the mayor of Fayetteville proclaimed May 30th, 2008 as Theressa Hoover Day. When she died in 2013, leading Methodists came from all over the world to attend her funeral, which was at Mount Sequoyah. She chose, that was one memorial service. There was another memorial service held for her in New York City at the Interchurch Center in New York City. She's internationally famous, at least in religious circles. And yet most people in Fayetteville don't even know this. So that's one of the things that I want to do is I hope at the end of all of this, we get a statue to her because I think that would be fitting. She chose to be buried here in Fayetteville in the segregated section of the old cemetery, which is known as Oaks, which is next to her grave. And I took these pictures myself, as you can probably tell, next to her father, James Hoover, a veteran of World War I. And I'm going to talk more about him in just a second, too. This is right next to the National Cemetery. Hoover was a pivotal mid-century bridge figure in American religion, in part because the church her family attended, St. James, was part of the Methodist Episcopal Church, the MEC, which is often referred to erroneously as the Northern Church, meaning that it was because the church split before the Civil War, like almost virtually all of them did, Protestants did, between Northern and Southern wings, and the MEC was the Northern branch. The MECS, Southern, is the Southern branch. This church is MEC, Northern Church. And so it's wrong to say it's Northern because Arkansas is not a Northern state, right? And if there's congregations in the South, and there were many MEC congregations in the South, then it's not solely Northern, but they were almost exclusively Black. All of these congregations were African-American. This congregation, again, correct me if I'm wrong, claims to be the oldest MEC congregation in Arkansas. As you see there, she taught Sunday school there, her first position of leadership in the church. And this church remained MEC until that merger, when those denominations merged. That's Northern, Southern, and Methodist Protestant merged in 1939, and the church comes together. And then it's just called the Methodist Church. Still not united. Again, I don't want to get too much into the weeds here because I can spend a lot of time doing that. It's still not united until we get to another merger, which is in 1968 with the Evangelical United Brethren. See what I mean? Why it took me 2 years to sort all this out. That's kind of hard. This is the plaque. I took all these pictures too. This is the plaque that St. James carries today with its historic designation. Very proud to be the first. At first, it was just a congregation. It wasn't the building. Just met in a home on Willow Street. And by the way, she lived on Willow Street too. Her family lived on Willow Street in, the segregated section of Fayetteville. But then they established the building itself in 1883. The story is that with the brick makers who were building the university, spirited away some of the bricks and built St. James because that was being constructed at the same time. Okay, so Hoover was a teenager when that merger occurred. So she grew up in an overwhelmingly white denomination, and these are the kinds of hard things to keep in mind. The MEC was a white denomination that had these Black congregations in it, right? It's a segregated denomination, but it's an overwhelmingly white denomination, and it at least was somewhat less racist than the more evangelical, more autonomous, like Baptist congregations in the South, because the missionaries of the MEC reached out specifically to African Americans, the freed people, right, to try to reach them and minister to them and serve them in a variety of ways. There's a lot of cultural imperialism that went on there, arrogance, I'm sure, that went on there, but still there's a lot of bridge work that's going on in that congregation, which I'm sure gives her the idea that you can actually work with white people, and it's not a lost cause to try to do that, to try to change minds. It's a worthwhile endeavor. Not just white people, but of course, white women in particular. Again, they're not of one mind. I don't mean to say that. That's certainly not true. But there is that, she has that vision that may otherwise not have occurred to her in another denomination. And it's partly because it's a connectional church too, that's connected up and down the line, that gives her this, which was kind of my point about the church really gave her, she worked for the church her whole life. It's her career, it's her opportunity, right? It's what makes her a national figure, is the Methodist Episcopal Church. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about her background, her personal background. Her grandfather, her father's stepfather, this is her father, was a circuit riding Methodist minister, okay? Although she told an interviewer he was actually a circuit walker because he didn't have a horse. So he walked, she said, I'm not sure if it's true, but she said as many as 200 miles to his appointments back when the Methodist Church did that, circuit riding, walking preachers. Given that he was African-American, that would not surprise me, because that would be very typical for African-American preachers to have these spread out churches all over the place, way too hard to minister to adequately. Her father here, James Hoover, this is one of the Shiloh Museum's images. Her father, James Hoover, was, as we mentioned, a World War I veteran. He had a 6th grade education. He was a very formative influence on her life. She described her father as a strong, kind, gentle, and dignified man who always opened the door of his home to anyone in need. Her father was the chief maintenance and groundsman at City Hospital. Although I just checked the census today and they list him as a janitor because, of course, he's Black. So they're not going to acknowledge any skills, right? He was the maintenance man. And by the way, even though he did spend most of his day, he worked full time at City Hospital, doing electrical work and stuff like that. He also was called upon to do kind of like an aide would, set bones and things like that. And he was such a dedicated employee and well-respected employee, they actually ultimately named a wing of the hospital after him. The old City Hospital, and paid tribute to him that way. Her mother, Rissy Vaughn Hoover, died when she was 2. Her stepmother, Edith, both her mother and her stepmother were domestics. The family lived on South Willow Street. They did own the home. Again, I checked that in the census today, but of course it has a very low value given the neighborhood, and it didn't have any indoor plumbing.
United Women.
Although I realize in the Ozarks in the 1920s was probably not that unusual, but they were technically in town. They were sort of on the outskirts of town, but technically in town. They didn't have a lot of money, but they did have middle-class values that included a strong appreciation for education, typical of Methodists.
Discussion.
She said it was just understood that we were going to go to high school and college, but Fayetteville had no high school for African Americans. So she and her 3 siblings went to live with their aunt, her father's sister, in a small East Texas town where they could attend the high school where the aunt taught.
Yes.
Theressa graduated at the top of her class in 1942. She clearly had a gift. She clearly had potential. From those beginnings, what led to Hoover's remarkable success was her Methodist belief system and connections to Methodist-affiliated institutions in her home state. For Methodists, the purpose of gaining knowledge was to prepare for a life of service. And her years at Philander Smith, where she went to college in Little Rock, prepared her for this exceptionally well. That is a Methodist-supported school. It was actually founded in the 1880s. There you have an older picture of it. Founded in the 1880s by the MEC, to train African-American ministers. Because when they first established these congregations, they sent white ministers down. Needless to say, African-American congregations want African-American ministers. They didn't have training. And so that's what Philander Smith was originally established for. It then, of course, opens up to many other people too. And it was co-ed, obviously, by the time that she went. It is private. Her father had to pay for that. And she's the only one of the children that went there. So clearly he saw potential in her that he was willing to sacrifice to send her to Philander Smith. That ends up, again, being an important connection for her, Philander Smith. Let's see. She attended during World War II. Classmates who went into service wrote back about things that she had never seen or even imagined, that Blacks and whites could work together quite amicably. Of course, when Black soldiers went over to France and England, they got a whole different reception, right? And they were astounded and amazed, and they wrote back about this. And again, that opens her eyes to the possibility. Well, so racism is not actually inherent to white people. They don't all behave that way. It's cultural, it's learned, and it can be changed. So again, vision, right? Possibilities. While at Philander Smith, she joined Delta Sigma Theta, a sorority that emphasized community service as well as scholarship. And she was active in the Methodist Student Organization as well as the Student Christian Association, which was the YWYMCA on campus. Also all of those very important formative influences. I will say that both the YWCA was the first national organization to have an interracial initiative like that in the South. And it was very active on campuses. The Methodist student movement would also become very active in that movement. So again, those are unusual in that sense that they both were advancing interracial initiatives. She was elected president of her class. And again, that tells you she's got these leadership qualities. Her senior year, 1946, the Little Rock, I think this is a more current image of Philander Smith there. Yeah. I'll leave it. Her senior year in 1946, she was hired by the Little Rock Methodist Council, which was an interracial group of Methodist women, to organize women's missionary associations in Black Methodist churches. This is just shortly before she graduated. To train her, they paid her way to take a special summer course at Garrett Seminary in Evanston, Illinois. So she went north, okay, to a white seminary to get that training. And she later described that as being very impactful and eye-opening to her too. Historians love to figure out the why. Why do people end up like this, right? What are the formative influences on her that caused her to be so unique, such a remarkable person? The same year she graduated, 1946, with a degree in business administration. So I can tell you more about the Little Rock Methodist Council if you're interested, but just to kind of move on from there, she worked for them for 3 years. And while she worked for them, again, that was an integrated group, mostly white women and Black Methodist preachers in Little Rock that were trying to, again, deal with the racial animosity in Little Rock. One of the things that they realized was there's no place for Black children. There were no recreational facilities for Black children in the state of Arkansas in 1946. None, zero. That's what Camp Aldersgate was established for. So guess what? They got a $25,000 grant from the women's division of the Methodist Church to purchase a turkey farm at outside Little Rock, now Camp Aldersgate. And to clean it up. There were no utilities. It was out in the middle of nowhere, but they kind of wanted it to be out in the middle of nowhere because they're going to hold interracial meetings there. And guess what? You get death threats when you do that. And so they wanted it to be secluded. They did get death threats. They did hold interracial meetings there. Some of the Women's Emergency Committee, that group, of which your mother was one, the whole Little Rock crisis, that was one of the places that they went for protection, for seclusion, where they could meet, hopefully in private. The word did get out. And the Ku Klux Klan did threaten them, and they did drive by. That's, of course, by that time it's improved. But meanwhile, I was going to say, the local women's society, the local WSCS, white women's societies, provided the money to hire somebody to run that camp, who was a white deaconess, and also Hoover. So a white woman and a Black woman together running that camp. They also provided additional monies beyond the grant from the women's division itself to clean it up and make it livable. It was a turkey farm, so they're cleaning out the breeder houses. There were 2 young men that helped her, 2 young Black men who were hired. She always tried to make sure that Black people got jobs. They were students at the time. They were very young. They had good backs, right, to help her clean it out. They both went on to become Methodist pastors, those young men. As I said, the only place in Arkansas at the time where Black and white, where interracial gatherings could happen. They did receive death threats. They were undeterred. Hoover said later that Aldersgate was established by a group of people who dared not accept the way it is as what must be. People who provided hope and a guide for future behavior. We were doing a bold thing, she remembered later, bringing together people across the lines of race. Lay women are justifiably proud. She always elevated the role of lay women too, which I forgot to mention at the beginning, because women can't be preachers. So if you're going to have influence and power in the church, lay people have to be elevated. Now, that's not anything distant from Methodist doctrine. The Methodists tend to do that too. But she always was very careful to let lay people know you have an important role to play in this church. Don't say just because I'm female, right? That you shouldn't be constrained by the strictures that society puts on you. Lay women, she said, are justifiably proud of their involvement with the camp and its origin and have continued to provide support, which they still do. Actually, the women's division still does provide support for that. They still own the property, which is now worth millions of dollars, that old turkey farm outside of Little Rock. And produces enough revenue apparently to keep itself maintained and operative. In 1948, so from there, she's graduated. In 1948, she went to work for the women's division itself of the Methodist Church as a field worker, which I showed you on that slide. She does that for 10 years. She traveled to the then 48 states and territories, as well as to India and Pakistan, speaking to local women's societies, pastors, schools, and colleges, doing leadership training and setting up new units of the women's missionaries associations. Now, keep in mind, this is 48. This required no small amount of courage when you're going into states that have Jim Crow laws and you don't know where you can stay, and she's by herself. That's also really unusual. It's courageous. It's brave to do that. A woman by herself. She didn't always know where she could stay. She couldn't always figure out where to get a meal, right? They wouldn't serve Black people in many of these places. So she almost always stayed with members of the church, often the pastors or someone in the women's societies that would be lodging her, basically. She says one of her later co-workers, Peggy Billings, said in her obituary, in Theresa's obituary, she said, "It required sacrifices that none of the other women who worked for the women's division had to think about." And that's really an important point, that white people just don't think about those issues that Black people had to deal with on a regular basis. So she did that for 10 years. Again, I can tell you more about that. Oops, I put this in there twice, just in case you wanted to look at it again, because there's so much information on there. And it can be so confusing. But I'm going to go ahead and move on, because I think you've got that now, right? In 1958, she was hired. She went up another rung. She had come to the attention of the National Women's Division leadership. She was remarkable and talented, and she was hired in 1958 by the woman who was seated on her left, which is Thelma Stevens, who's from Mississippi, another person I'm writing about, who was a head of one of the departments within the women's division. And she was hired as a staff member of the Department of Christian Social Relations in 1958. Again, the headquarters were when the church merged, the headquarters were in New York City. And so she, along with these other women, are living in New York City. Needless to say, that's eye-opening too, to live in New York City with such a different, ethos than compared to living in a city in the Deep South or Little Rock, which isn't exactly Deep South, but has a lot of the same ethos, right? Exposed to new ideas and new possibilities. So she's hired as a staff member. This made Hoover the first African-American professional at the Methodist Church to work among the general church membership, meaning with whites and Blacks. So she was the first African-American not hired just to work with African-Americans, with whites as well as Blacks. She moved to New York City, where she would live, as I mentioned, for the next 40 years. Encouraged by Stevens, she attended school at night on leaves during the summer, and she earned an MA in education from NYU in 1962. Staff members of the women's division had certain programs under their responsibility, and she had several. One of hers was birth control. I'm going to come back to that. Another was educating people on the role and mission of the United Nations. She took groups to UN headquarters, of course, not far away in New York City, to sit in on the proceedings and held study seminars about its role. It was so successful that the women's division floated a loan to build a 12-story bronze and glass structure to house the Church Center for the United States, which is right across the plaza, UN Plaza, basically, from the United Nations. It still stands and still serves that function today. It is significant that that was the women's division that did that. In 1965, she moved up another rung into top leadership, becoming Assistant General Secretary of the Women's Division, with responsibility for the section of Program and Education for Christian Mission, one of three major units of the Women's Division. The Northwest Arkansas Times did cover this story. I searched all the newspaper databases, needless to say, and here's the headline, y'all. Fayetteville girl named to top Methodist staff position. Okay, and you are like, yes, of course, they said that. She was 40 years old. Fayetteville girl. And she's Black, right. At least they called her Miss Hoover, which is an improvement, because, you know, traditionally they wouldn't even put the honorific in front of a Black person's name. It was always first name only, because they're trivializing them, treating them as you would children traditionally. At least by 65, they've gone that far. But Fayetteville girl. So that's more sexist, I think, than anything else. Yeah. Finally, in 1968, she was elected to the top staff position, Deputy General Secretary of the Women's Division, as I told you, where racial and gender equality were part of her mission. Methodist women's missionary organizations were, Hoover said, concerned with the development of their own potential, the welfare of their children and those of others throughout the world, other children throughout the world, the lack of respect in many societies for the single woman, and the high illiteracy rate among women, top priorities for her. She believed in empowering lay women, as I mentioned, the grassroots, the most likely route to power and influence for women in the within Methodism. Said Garlinda Burton, another person with whom she worked, she let lay women, particularly women of color and women from small towns, as Garlinda was from a small town, Know, and this is a quote, know that they are the legs the church stand on, and that position deserves respect. May Gray from Kansas City is an example of someone that she pulls up, encourages her to come into national leadership, the first African-American president of the, what is essentially the UMW, okay, the Lay Women's Missionary Association. So those are her concerns. In 1972, she gave an invited lecture at Harvard's Divinity School entitled Triple Jeopardy. She said, while all women suffer depression because of their gender, African-American women also suffer because of their race, a phenomenon that today we have a term for that. We call that intersectionality. The term didn't exist at the time. So there's those twin legs of oppression. The third leg, she said, for Black church women was the church. This lecture critiqued Black male theology and control in Black churches. Her 10 years spent crisscrossing the country as a field worker had taught Hoover that African-American women were the glue that kept churches alive and afloat. Based on those strengths, Hoover argued that women of color should contest the assumptions of white church women, who always are going to look down at them, as well as the power of Black male clergy. Again, a quote, "The Black church woman must come to the point of challenging both her sisters and other denominations and the clergy male hierarchy in her own. She has given the most, and in my judgment, gotten the least. Her foresight, ingenuity, and stick-to-itiveness have kept many Black churches open, many Black preachers fed, many parsonages livable." End quote. Oppression was unjust, no matter the sphere in which it operated, no matter the race or the gender of the oppressor. That is rather remarkable that she took that on, because many Black women were not willing to do that, to criticize the Black male hierarchy. For, again, reasons I could talk about, but maybe that's obvious about why they wouldn't want to do that. She remained in that position, as I said, until 1990, when at the age of 65, she retired with a record to be proud of. Under her command, there was never any hint of scandal. Again, if I'm wrong about that, audience on Zoom, tell me, but as far as I'm aware, never any hint of scandal, impropriety, misuse of funds, or abuse of power. How many church leaders can say that? That would have been entirely contrary to Hoover's feminist ethics. By the way, she never called herself a feminist, according to my sources. She never called herself a feminist. She didn't like labels. She didn't want to alienate her constituency either, but her words are feminist. Her ideas are feminist. Also important to keep in mind, she does work for the board, the Women's Division Board, which is an elected board, some nominated, some elected positions, and generally the board tended to be more conservative than the staff. She's staff. And the staff were continually educating themselves. And sometimes they had to educate the board, whereas the board members kind of came and went. You know, you're on a board for a few years and you'll come and go. And so they tended to bring kind of hometown, small town values with them a lot of the times, maybe Southern values with them a lot of times. They tended to be more conservative, but she's not. So she has to keep that in mind, is what I'm saying. She has to be diplomatic. She has to be politic in order to not, because she's elected herself. She can lose her job. So you got to be careful, a little careful what you say, right? In that case. So she retires in 1990. I didn't even begin to talk about all of her other hats that she wore, but I'll kind of list them for you to get an idea. Her volunteer service included being a board member of the National Council of Churches. No small thing there either. Church Women United, which was an integrated organization of church women that worked also towards interracial understanding. The World Council of Churches, the National Council of Negro Women, NCNW, and the Board of Trustees, Payne College, which is another Methodist-supported college that's HBCU, historically Black. As chair of the YWCA's National Public Affairs Committee from 1964 to 1967, she helped to prick its conscience on the issues of war and peace, civil rights, and economic and social justice. Again, not many people would touch that. She touched it. She was a founding member of Black Methodist for Church Renewal and persuaded the Women's Division to support that organization to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. I know of at least one donation in that amount. I'm not sure how many of them there were. She, along with Dorothy Height, who was her friend, and also most people don't know this, another Methodist. Dorothy Height, president of the NCNW, led the YWCA's Task Force on Racial Justice. Now, she and Dorothy Height, I think they're comparable. Dorothy Height has biographies, but Dorothy Height also wrote an autobiography, and Hoover did not. And that may have something to do with it. But Dorothy Height, President Obama honored Dorothy Height, right? If you Google that, you'll see. Yeah, honored her. She was in her 90s at that time. And I feel like not that she doesn't deserve it. She does deserve it, absolutely deserve it. But Hoover deserves it too. And I want people to understand that and recognize her. The two of them led, I should say, saw through to completion the project to erect a monument to Mary McLeod Bethune, another Methodist, in Lincoln Park, Washington, D.C. And Theressa Hoover got the Women's Division to appropriate money. That project had been underway for a good while, but they had just had trouble raising the money for it, and they kind of put them over the top so that they were able to erect that. All right, and so again, I know I'm getting a little close to time here. Let me kind of run through some of her achievements as CEO of the Women. I can't get to them all, needless to say, but while I'm doing this, let me let you read the purpose of the United Methodist Women, which she also oversaw that transition from when the church united in 1968 from the WSCS, the older organization, to the merged organization, which is the UMW. She oversaw that whole transition. And I didn't even, because it's again so weedy, I didn't get into the fact that the church was segregated all that time until, is that mine? Okay, that's okay. The church was segregated all that time from 1930, that was a sop to Southerns, from 1939 to 1968. And actually until 1972. 68 is when they said, we're going to stop the segregation. But needless to say, Southerners dug their heels in. I think Mississippi was last. Are we surprised? Mississippi was last to integrate its congregations. But anyway, that's going on while she is at the helm. Okay. So she was on actually the task force that helped to produce that union agreement, and also shepherded the phasing out of the older segregated organizations and the creation, the birth of the new integrated one. And dislocation that happens there, right? You're disrupting lots of long-held traditions, right? And so she did that by all accounts remarkably well, beautifully, smoothly, and kept the numbers were up, kept the numbers up. Now, that's not going to continue to be the case forever. Obviously, they're down now. But at the time, she did about as good a job of that as anybody could have done, by all accounts anyway. Now, as I mentioned, she is responsible, she with her staff, like Ellen Kirby, who's with us on Zoom, who was hired for this purpose, proved to be influential feminists, influencing the church, which in turn influenced other people. She's in New York City, the headquarters, needless to say, a feminist hotspot, right? And she was very influenced by the women's liberationists. She said that. She wrote in one of the books that she published with Unveiled Face, she said, we church women, she meant, we understood at once what the secular feminists were struggling with and in revolt against. These intelligent, angry, younger women articulated our frustrations also. Their analysis deepened our understanding of the systemic oppression of women. Their determination to revise patriarchal culture and politics energized us. So sort of a symbiotic relationship. So she encouraged the UMW, units of the UMW, so from the top down, the connectional organization, to adopt many of the movement strategies, such as consciousness raising sessions. They did that. Basically, their unit meetings functioned as consciousness raising sessions. It's not my individual problem. It's a structural problem beyond me, right? In which women tried to understand themselves within a male-dominated society and church. They supported the goals of second wave feminism, including reproductive rights, the Equal Rights Amendment. They got a general commission on the status and role of women, conference-based ones around the country as well. So again, national, but also below them as well. The North Arkansas Conference established one in 1974. Fayetteville's in that conference. And the goals were to see that women were adequately represented on boards and in pulpits. And secondly, to create a favorable climate of opinion for female clergy appointments. They pushed for visibility for women, offered training for leadership, monitored the status of women at conferences, that's always an issue, and reported back how many women were elected or appointed as delegates and to boards, and so forth. So they funded a lot of stuff too. Here's where I get to the women's issues here. They funded, under her leadership, the women's division organized and funded many different aspects of the second wave, including women's studies, groups that were trying to implement women's studies programs at universities, women's centers, childcare and other aids to women students, abortion counseling services, which meant they were assisting women who were seeking abortions. And I can talk much more about that too, domestic violence shelters and so forth, and also teams that work to transform masculinist theological understandings and bureaucracies and language. The Inclusive Language Initiative also is coming down the pike at the same time. She and Ellen Kirby and others very supportive of that. So here I'll get to my local. I'm trying to work in as much of the local as I can. I was kind of happy to end up in Fayetteville. My husband and I have only been here 2 years, so that I was hoping I could locate a lot more about her, because I really would like to write a full-length biography if possible. Turns out one of the leading feminists of Northwest Arkansas, we have one of those with us, Alan, who's a chronicler of Northwest Arkansas feminist movement, but another one of those who was on the ground at the time was Suzanne Farr. And she gave an interview, which is available online at Smith College, where she said she started the Women's Project, was kind of the umbrella term for the organizations that she was assisting. She started the Women's Project under the umbrella of the United Methodist Church. The Northwest Arkansas Project for Battered Women and Their Families received a grant of $30,000 from the Women in Crisis of the United Methodist Church to support a new shelter. Farr went to the district UMW because those women had been such supporters of the battered women. That's her words. They had been such supporters of the movement. And the district superintendent agreed to, her word, umbrella the project. They helped us, even though the Good News Methodists, those are the conservative Methodists, the Good News Methodists attacked us because I, Suzanne, was an out lesbian. She said the UMW were wonderful, just extraordinary. They are very, very strong on educating their members in a progressive way. Every 4 years, they have a huge conference, and it's hard for them to find a city where they can have it because they require that the hotels have good labor practices. They require that the hotels don't discriminate racially and in other ways. They require that they have good environmental practices, that they don't serve you on styrofoam and plastic. They're just really extraordinary, wonderful people. That's high praise coming from Suzanne Farr, who, if you're a feminist, that is a name everybody knows in feminist circles. So really a leading feminist philosopher, feminist theory. So she said, and so within the church, they stood with us. They took on the battle for us for 5 years. As the 80s progressed, there were attacks against feminists everywhere, and there were particularly attacks against lesbians in leadership. The United Methodist Church was terribly baited as being lesbians and communists, so they fought those battles alongside us. The Women's Project here in Northwest Arkansas was always heterosexual and lesbian, always African-American and white. And again, she goes on to praise that. I'll have to cut that quotes short, but she goes on about that. So again, I think it's about time for me to wrap up. Am I about right? Oh, we're doing good. Okay. Thanks to Hoover, then, to continue, the Women's Division became a founding member and the only religious group on the board of directors of ERA America, the umbrella organization for all national organizations working for ratification of the ERA. Response Magazine, which was the official organ of the UMW. Response Magazine regularly carried articles educating readers on how they might persuade their legislators to vote in support of the amendment, basically strategizing tactics, techniques to try to get it passed. Of course, they failed. But as a result, and this is where I first happened on this topic, when I was doing my research for the other monograph on second wave feminism in Louisiana, I discovered so many of those people that had a religious affiliation, that is to say, if they said that they had a religious affiliation, because many of them don't, but if they said that they were churchgoers, the vast majority of those who claimed a religious affiliation, who were working within the second wave of feminism in Louisiana, were Methodist. And I was like, wow, that is something. How did that happen? Boom. Back here to Theressa Hoover and Ellen Kirby, who's with us via Zoom, who had a lot to do with this too. So again, unfortunately, all their efforts went down in flames because the conservatives proved, well, they have more money, but also they were better organized and used a lot of disinformation. We can relate to that, can't we, in here? Disinformation tactics to scaremonger, fearmonger, and destroy the Equal Rights Amendment, unfortunately. So it's still in limbo. But Hoover, like all Methodist leaders, emphasized the idea that faith and love should be put into action. She regularly reminded response readers, quote, Christian values are not important when they are only held. They must be expressed in all of our life. Many of the stands she took were quite controversial. For example, the hotly debated issue of women's access to family planning resources and to legal abortion, which the Methodists had stood with on that side for many years. Well, during that time that she's in the position, I should say. Thanks to her and the women's division, the UMC became one of the first mainline Christian denominations to go on record in support of reproductive freedom, or what they refer to as responsible parenthood. Again, if you want more, I can tell you a whole lot more about that. But well before it was legal, they were supporting, their language was supporting liberalization of abortion laws. And I don't know if y'all know this, Sarah Weddington, who was the person who launched the case, Roe v. Wade. She's the Texas attorney, Southern woman, very important in all of this, who took the case that went to the Supreme Court that ultimately Roe v. Wade resulted. She's Methodist. She went to a Methodist college. She's the daughter of a Methodist preacher. And her mother was a member of UMW, or at the time, WSCS, before it was UMW. Justice Blackmun, who wrote the majority opinion, also Methodist. So you see, the Methodist had a really big role. And essentially what she did as head of the WD, or in charge of that position, these women at the women's division influenced the church to take those positions, you see. So again, I can say more about that if you want to talk about that. If you would like for me to talk more about that, I can also give you theology behind it if you want. Okay. So I guess it's about time for me to quit. So I would like to say, again, I can answer any questions that you would like for me to talk about further. When she retired, when asked what she considered her greatest achievement, she said it was to have kept the women's division reasonably autonomous and in control of its own resources. That is the key factor. It is a single-sex organization. It controlled its own monies. There was a hostile takeover in 1964, which they have undone since then. But nonetheless, it's still female-led at every level, with the board above it, not to discount that. They're part of the general board, but they still raise their own funds and control their own funds. And they were the only Protestant denomination for which that was true, which is what emancipates her, to allow her to do this kind of thing and take those really proactive feminist positions, female forward positions. So she said that was her greatest achievement. If we had not remained in control of our autonomy and finances, most of our work with women and children around the world would not be in existence today, she said. It's a very, very, very important organization that gets way too little attention. Because you're talking about 1.5 to 1.75 million people. The numbers are a little slippery because they didn't all report very well, right? So you kind of guessing a little bit, but somewhere in that ballpark. A vast army of people out there, not all of whom are feminists or who would have worked for this. Certainly that's not true. And the units could kind of pick and choose what they decided that they wanted to work on. So they don't all it's not lockstep by any means. But nonetheless, as I said, you go digging and you'll find them all over the place. Some of the most proactive people on the ground in the South are these Methodist women at her direction. All right, should I quit now? We're good? Time to quit? Is that what that means? Or I'm not sure what that hand signal meant. Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to hold people up. But so I was going to talk a little bit about the church that's named for her. I went down there recently and these are my pictures. You can see they're hanging on the wall. That's why there's a glare on them. Because I was hoping maybe they would have some of her stuff. Maybe she had deposited some things there. As it turns out, they didn't. But people are resources too. And so I was able to talk to the pastor, that's her, Deborah Bell, right there in front of the church. She took my call, very busy. The church was started by one of her mentees, Reverend Bill Robinson, who's this person's father. I did not take his picture, I regret that, who served as pastor for 32 years. He had known Theressa, he said, I interviewed both of these people. He had known Theressa when she was a community worker in Little Rock. He said, when I was in short pants, he's known her that long. He remembered her and Margaret Marshall, deaconess, putting together Camp Aldersgate, because guess what? He was one of those two young men cleaning out the turkey houses. I'm like, is that you? Really? That was me. He's the one that went on and started this church. He said Theressa helped get the WSCS started in the Little Methodist Church. Oh, sorry, not this one, but the Little Methodist Church that he and his mother attended. His mother died when he was 11. The other women in the WSCS took over mothering him. His daddy said was an alcoholic and a gambler, not a very fit father. He said, I don't believe I would be here today if it hadn't been for her. See why he named the church after her. He spoke of her very fondly. He said Theressa helped the WSCS women learn to do social justice and service work. He bought this church it was basically a white flight neighborhood for $1. He insisted on that. And he asked Theressa if he could name it for her, honor her. The only church that has this distinction, being named for someone still alive and also an African-American female. She said yes, she would agree to it under 3 circumstances, which they have memorized. You must have a UMW, you have to be in mission to the community, and don't ask me for any money. He said in the end, she gave us plenty of money, but we didn't ask her for it. And a couple of the family members were members of the church, her extended family. I think one of her brothers, actually. And he did that. He did all of those things. The Community Development Foundation he started is still in operation. That's where I met both of them. Better Community Development, Inc., still going strong. In fact, Debbie had thought that she might try to be here tonight, but I guess she couldn't make it. They're busy saving the world. So it's a long drive from there. Anyway, lots and lots and lots of, I could talk more about that too. Debbie presides over the church now. She's the pastor there now, as well as the head of the BCI, the community organization. I asked her, what did Hoover mean to you? She said, Hoover identified, inspired, motivated, taught, modeled, and empowered young women. She did that for me too. She spoke boldly, and watching her gave me courage to do likewise, to speak out against injustice. She was very witty. She could reprimand you or correct you, but you'd be okay with it. She didn't belittle you. I was nominated to serve as an officer on the conference level of UMW. I never would have done that without her pushing me to do it. She had a great spirit about her. Clearly that living on. This is her legacy. That's a legacy I want people to know about. Like I said, I hope that I can conjure up enough interest that Fayetteville will erect a statue to her memory too. So I think that's a good place for me to stop. I'm sure there's many things I left out that you would like to know about, but I will throw it open to questions. Can I ask you to go ahead and then I'll get you Alan? Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, 1956, which is kind of when a lot of the other Protestant denominations are doing it. They're a little bit early. That one is mine. Good, perfect time. They're a little bit earlier than some of the others. The Episcopals were way later, but they're all sort of beginning to consider it at that point, 1956. Yeah, but you know what happens? You get tokenism, right? And so you start to get women in, but they get the worst appointments, you know, and they just have very little influence for a really long time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned her getting a master's degree shortly after she more. The plaque in the church said Dr. Theressa.
Oh, it's an honorary degree. It's an honorary degree, and I think it's Philander Smith. I have it written somewhere. I'm not exactly sure which university gave her that. Yeah, good point. I need to look that up. Yeah.
A lot of my questions probably you can't answer because you don't have the personal stuff.
Yeah.
And for me also, it's why do we know if whether her siblings or her father or stepmother had influence in this way? Was the school in Texas she went to particularly progressive in a certain way? Do you know anything about it?
I mean, I don't, except for what I told you. I don't know that I can't think that Texas was particularly progressive, but no, I think it was the women's division and the education that they insisted on. And that is very important to opening one's mind and expanding one's horizon. And the Methodists are really strong on that. The UMW and its predecessors is really strong on it. They do study sessions. They have a reading list every year. which again, you can choose from. It's not mandated. It's a long list, but they tend to be really, really progressive readings, right? Like Niebuhr and, the really liberal theologians of the day and even older. And they were reading feminist stuff too.
Were her parents in the church?
Yeah, they're in the church.
But in terms of role models, we don't know.
I don't have that information.
And last, sorry.
No, go ahead, and then I'll come back to her.
Last, do you know anything about her time when she retired and came back here?
I've sort of reached out to everybody, have not gotten much. Really, Sara Pair, who's the pastor at Mount Sequoyah, was the best help for me there. But again, I went to Mount Sequoyah looking to see if the UMW had records, if I could find something.
Did you live while she, like in summers when she went to Philander, would she come back here?
I don't know that.
I just wonder, I mean,
I assume you go visit your
before
family
she tried
sometimes.
to wipe out part of the Scott Springs and that, I wonder what her opinion was on that, if she had any interest.
Are you asking like kind of about the dynamic between?
Whether she got involved in what was happening here while she was at Philander or something.
Oh, in the 40s? Because that's in the
45 when they, proposed taking the highway through Willow.
I haven't seen anything like that. I think she was probably too young at that point to do that.
Again, where she got her stuff, I didn't know how.
I mean, I can't say no I don't have it. Yeah, don't have it. Good questions. I'd love to know. I'm sure she kept tabs, but I don't know what.
I was just going to comment that I was privileged to know her father. I was a very tiny child. He was the most outgoing, wonderful man. We would leave on City Hospital. I lived just on the corner of School and Rock. He would walk to the corner, head up over the Rock Hill where the police station was, to his home. He was always whistling. I was a tiny girl, and I would run out and we would wave and say hello. He was just such a positive person. And of course, I regret that they tore down the building.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't regret the building being gone because of what's there, but I'm sorry we lost that tribute.
Yeah, right. Good point. That's an excellent point.
Something should be done, like a monument.
Let's do it, y'all.
on that
We got a little
property or
group right
something.
here. Oh,
Yeah.
I'll give you my contact information. Well, that's a great idea. I agree about that totally. And so did you live near him? Is that what you're saying?
No, I lived,
Oh.
the city hospital was on School Street. As you went up School Street, he would turn on Rock. My parents' house was on the corner, a little white house
Okay.
on the corner. So I would run out on the front porch. I did that for years. He died when I was 7.
Uh-huh.
And my parents were
Made an impression on you.
devastated that they had lost him.
Uh-huh.
He was
Well
so
liked.
respected.
Just a fine character, huh? Yeah.
Country Doctor Museum has some tribute to him.
Oh, good to know. I'm gonna write that down. Okay. Did you have some other questions?
So online, I've got comments more than I've got.
Okay.
Questions.
If they're bad, you're not gonna say them out loud, right?
No, exactly. I do censor. Sandra Mitchell says, Ms. Hoover would always say a woman instead of amen.
That's great. Oh my gosh, that made my time here worth it right there.
Elizabeth said the New York Times did a full-page spread on Theressa in the late 1980s.
Okay, I will look that up.
Sandra Mitchell said a woman with a purpose is a video of Miss Hoover and it's on YouTube.
Oh, okay. I never thought to try YouTube. I'm going up to Madison, New Jersey, looking at everything in the office up there. Wait, was that about what?
You were talking about peer review.
Oh, about the Equal Rights Amendment. Yeah. Yes, and just what they were saying about the women's division too was just, but I mean, it's McCarthyism basically.
Right, and then about the time Alan was asking about the progressive influences, Deaconess Catherine and Sarah, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name, she said that Mission U, which is transformational learning for you
Yeah.
faith, and others was super influential.
Okay, yeah, somebody else mentioned that. That's sort of like their study group, I think. I believe that's right.
No.
Like Schools of Christian Mission, similar to that. Anybody? Maybe they'll answer you over there. I can't see what she can see. Okay, good.
Yeah,
Are there other questions or comments, anyone?
I'm still on. Yeah, I'm still on.
Laura's made it, she was alive in 2013 and I hadn't met her.
This is,
I'm
you don't
lesser
need
for it.
I'm sorry, what did
I
you say?
said I'm the lesser for not having.
You
met her.
know, I know. And y'all, I went to school at the University of Arkansas. I graduated in 1988 with my PhD. And of course, later I happened upon this. And as you can imagine, I've kicked myself so many times because I didn't have the project then. I didn't think about it then. I was doing kind of 19th century. Now I do 20th century stuff. And I just wish that I would have. And of course, she passed before I knew I needed to talk to her.
When did you learn about her at the work?
It was just through the process of all of this other research. I've been working on Methodist women now for quite a while. Southern Methodist women, because I'm a Southern historian of the South. And so ever since I was doing that work on as I mentioned, the feminist movement in Louisiana, and I discovered that it was very Methodist heavy. After I finished that, then I started working on this in between some other projects. But in the course of that, I mean, you can't miss her because she's the head of the UMW. And then also Thelma Stevens, who was her mentor, sort of that pulled her up into the UMW, who's from Mississippi, also a really remarkable white human being, but extremely anti-racist. That's a great story too, but I don't have time to tell them that, do I? It's a great story though. So I don't know, several years, it kind of all blurs in my head, but I feel like she needs a whole lot more recognition than she gets right now. So that's my mission in life before I die. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for all of you on Zoom. Appreciate it very much. And I'm happy to visit, chat, eat. Feel free. I'll take this off. I'm kind of hot.